Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Earth Journalism Network webinar on using data to investigate pangolin trafficking. Thank you all for joining us today. My name is Amy Sim, and I'm the project manager for Internews Earth Journalism Network Asia Pacific project. First of all, I hope every one of you and your family are keeping well during this coronavirus pandemic. I guess many of you joining us here are journalists or are interested in journalism. I thank you for your work, helping to keep the public and your communities informed of the facts and latest knowledge on COVID-19 and other relevant environmental issues, including this one we're covering today on wildlife trafficking. And more specifically on the pangolin trade. As you may have seen, research studies have found the pangolin to be a potential intermediary host that transmitted the new coronavirus from bats to people. The pangolin is also the world's most trafficked mammal. So today I'm very happy to be joined by our friends Patrick Burler, Trang Bui and Xu Jiaming from the Environmental Reporting Collective. They've put together a very good series of reports across several Asian countries on the trading of pangolin and their parts. They'll be sharing with us today how they use data from court documents and local media reports to gain new insights into the pangolin trade. At EJN, Earth Journalism Network, we have also been covering the trafficking of pangolin in Asia, as well as track the trafficking route from Africa to Asia. These stories can be found on our website at earthjournalism.net. Before I turn over to Patrick, Jiaming, and Trang, just want to say a few words about the Earth Journalism Network, in case some of you are not very familiar with it. So the Earth Journalism Network, or EJN for short, is a project of Internews, which is an international media development international organization. Earth Journalism Network is a community of around 12,000 journalists from 180 countries who share the same passion for environmental reporting. At EJN, we work closely with our community to improve the quantity and quality of environmental reporting. And we do this through a range of activities, including story grants, fellowships, conferences, mentoring, workshops, and so on and so forth. You can find out more information about EJN from our website, and if you like, I encourage you to sign up if you haven't yet. It's free to sign up as a member on our website, and by signing up, you'll be able to find out about all the different types of opportunities that we provide and regularly announce on our website. This webinar is one of a series of webinars that EJN is holding about COVID-19 and other zoonotic diseases and the environmental origins like the wildlife trade, and more widely looking at human pressure on the environment, as well as the impact of COVID-19 on the environment. For this webinar today, we have allocated an hour and a half of time, and we will have our guest speakers present for the first 40 minutes and leave lots of time for questions and answers after that. We encourage you to ask questions throughout the webinar, and it would be good if you can put down your name and where you're from along with your questions. We will collect your questions and answer them after the presentation, or some of our presenters may answer them straight away on the Q&A feature on this webinar. There is also a chat function, but I ask that you only use the Q&A feature for sending questions, so it will be easier for us to collect these questions and address them in the webinar. EJN has two more webinars coming out that are targeting Asian audience. One will take place tomorrow on reporting on the animal trade and zoonotic diseases, focusing on the situation in the Philippines at 3 p.m. Manila time tomorrow. We have another webinar scheduled for the 6th of May at 2 p.m. Thailand and Vietnam time, looking at how we can leverage existing data sources to look at how COVID-19 and other environmental threats like climate change and air pollution combined are impacting on vulnerable communities. We will also introduce a new Asia wildlife trafficking tracking tool known as Wild Eye Asia at that webinar. So for now, I will turn over to Patrick to introduce himself and our two other speakers. Over to you, Patrick.
Thank you, Amy. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for this webinar, and thanks to Internews and the Earth Journalist Network for also giving us this opportunity to show our reporting, share our reporting with you. We'll be sharing not only our reporting, but also how we did it. And we'll also share links to the data so that you can also do the same reporting in wherever you are. First, I'd like to kind of show you this is a pangolin. So this is kind of the challenge that we're faced when we did this kind of story. We started investigating the pangolin, global trade in pangolins in late 2018, and this is kind of the challenge. This is the Vietnamese border to China. How do you on a global scale monitor something that gets smuggled across borders like this one? And it's not declared, and you don't find any official records of its trade, and it's not regulated, and of course it's illegal. So how can you find data on this, and how can you use data to kind of investigate it? And just to show you, this is from our partners in Myanmar, the wildlife at a market, at a roadside market in Myanmar. There's a pangolin being sold there, and you can really, if you look at this, you are at that road, you see the pangolin, but how do you do the big picture? How do you do the whole supply chain of poachers from Africa, from Southeast Asia to China, sometimes Vietnam? To show you the pangolin, because I hope the video works. There you go. Let's see. So we teamed up as a group of journalists to investigate this trade and kind of to brainstorm what data we could use and what approaches we could use to report this story. And you see we're about 40 journalists involved in 3 continents. And this is a look at the various smuggling routes that we have come across. And you can see here that it's truly a global scale, and local journalists can hardly do justice to this reporting on this global scale. You really need to collaborate across borders to understand what is happening. So there are 3 approaches to data that we looked at. And the first one is, of course, the pricing. So what is the price of a pangolin? That will tell you something. And we look at criminal cases, and Trang and Jiaming will walk you through that. And then we'll look at the legal use, the registered use, what kind of public data you can use to get a glimpse of the use of pangolins. For the pricing, one thing we did across our group of our team is we asked everyone to ask the poachers, the traders, the smugglers, the pharmaceutical companies that actually buy the pangolin scales for how much, what the current market rates are for pangolin scales and meat. And that gives you a picture of what the current situation in one market is, and you could actually track that over time. But what we did is we kind of used it to reconstruct the supply chain, assuming that they're of course cheapest at the beginning of the supply chain and the most expensive where they end. And this is kind of an overall picture. The data, of course, is subject to variation. It changes within countries, and it changes. It changes all the time, but you do get a good sense of what is happening. So if you're looking into wildlife trade, I also encourage you, and you have access to poachers, smugglers, traders, or law enforcement who also might have insights. Then I encourage you to really track the price to see the bigger trends. And so this is one kind of reporting that we did in Myanmar that Jiaming did with friends from Myanmar Now, which is a fantastic online publication there. And we went to the wildlife markets, and we went to the two major cities, Yangon and Mandalay, and tried to find out what the prices are. And it really gives you a sense of how the trade is flowing within the country as well. I would now move on to criminal cases and seizures. There are plenty of resources, actually. There's a lot of data on criminal cases. And here are some sources. We'll share these links with you later, and you'll find a lot of data on on legal cases. But you'll find, as Trang will show you, that there's still much to be done, and there is a lot of potential for additional reporting on seizures and how to systematically visualize and report on them. What we did is we looked at the Chinese court records, and that was Jiaming's work. So what we did is we collected all the Chinese court records we could find on in the official database that were related to pangolin smuggling, and we analyzed them. And I'll pass the word to Jiaming. Jiaming, do you want to describe quickly like what we see here? And
yeah. Hello, this is Jiaming. I'm the reporter of the Environmental Reporting Collective. Last year, I participated in a Pangolin Report and has been to Myanmar with Ting and Vietnam with Trang here to do collaboration report. And in this page, you can see it's a map with different location points and smuggling route that guide us doing our stories. I'll explain. The dark blue points is important cities with a lot of Myanmar Chinese or Chinese people living. The yellow one are where we have leads and informations. The most important data is the light blue points and the red points across the Myanmar and China border. This is the data from China Judgment Online system. It's all open to public. And the data used here is 26 cases from that system that specific mention locations in Myanmar. It gave you information about case time, when it got caught, and the smuggling route, item, person's name, prison term. So the data draws all the lines between Myanmar and China of smuggling route that is open to public, like top cities across the border. And this data can be found openly in China Judgment Online. And it has many commercial sites that scraping the official data, made it more user-friendly. I will share with you later. The story here we do based on this data is that we've been to 5 cities and have been see a lot of pangolins or pangolin skills that been trafficked in a plain sight in Myanmar. And what is interesting and important is that where we and a lot watching group think that it should most happening in remote or dangerous or ethnic group part that mentioned in this map. Our interview found that new route, the new way of smuggling, our way that is neglected, is that actually the biggest border city or the checkpoint between Myanmar and China, the Muse and really is probably plays a very big important role in smuggling. It is a legal custom. It is controlled by both central government. And this is how the data get us and back up when we're doing our report.
Go to the next one.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So in this page is also from the call system. It is a very interesting case. What you see here is also locations related with one very big case in China that tell us a lot about methods inside a big smuggling group. The red point across China and Malaysia tells us the route, where it starts, where it trade, and where they were caught up by the police. And the yellow line was the route from Malaysia to China. The yellow or the light green points in China and in Malaysia is where the smuggler come from, where their hometown was. And the blue ones was the facilities and addresses that happens in 2019 with more than 13 tons of pangolin skills. And the two cases had many in common in the blue points, so we think they are connected. So the data used here is also from the judgment. We can see is that it is almost 10 tons of pangolin or pangolin scales or frozen pangolin or live pangolins. And their worth is about 5 million renminbi at least. And the case was so important because so interesting and stand out that the one Malaysian man, he was given to lifetime imprisonment, which is very rare in law practice in China because it's a foreigner, see? And also 4 Chinese people, 1 for 10 years and 3 for 5 years. What they got, these 4 Chinese men, they got 8,000 renminbi for each smuggling movement. It's like about 1,000 US dollars. It's quite small. Sometimes they eat a pangolin as treatment. And the story here is that we have a lot of small cases in China, but we don't know the big case. Why the smuggler doing it? Who they are? I think in the low end, many of them, they are low end, poor fishermen. They're doing it for money to feed their families, and they have limited choice because all the fish village was very poor. And actually, the bosses were not hurt in the case. We visit the smugglers' hometown in China and in Malaysia. Now we've talked to their families. The people in Malaysia, the boss gave compensation to his family for 1 year, but then disappeared. So that gave us a big picture of the cases. And also the case was involved with Hong Kong, Malaysia, Hong Kong, and China. Hong Kong as a point, transport point with boss living there, and they are actually still free out there. So it's about big case. It's about this page. It's called, yeah.
This one.
Okay, this two is that our data team, they're also doing a keyword searching and heat map. On the left is that they are searching on the pangolin case, seizures, and the worst of the seizures. And you can see the big case happened in Shanghai, Guangdong, and Yunnan, and they are very high worth, like more than 8 million renminbi. So you can see the business is very big. It's a big business and a profit business. And we can see in the red is that we're searching also on the judgment system with keywords related with eat pangolin or restaurant or meat. And we see that the people consumption it, like eat it, mainly happening in the southeast part of China or the south part of China, like Yunnan, Guangdong, Fujian, Zhejiang. They have a tradition, or they may like to eat pangolin. That gives us a big picture and context to understand the situation. Yeah.
Thank you, Jiaming.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's move on to Vietnam and Trang. Trang, in Vietnam, it wasn't as, we didn't have a searchable data set, so Trang built one, and she's going to show us quickly how she did that. Hi, Trang.
Well, thanks, Patrick. Hi everyone. So I'm very delighted to be sharing today. I'd like to thank Internews for organizing this webinar and thank you all for attending this webinar. So I'm Trang Bui. I'm a reporter of the Environmental Reporting Collective. So last year I was part of the Pangolin Reports project and I cover Vietnam. What I did during the project was a mixture of data reporting and undercover investigations. The undercover investigation parts I did with jamming in Hanoi and in the Vietnam-China border. But today I'll be talking mainly about my data reporting during the Pangolin Reports project. Why is it important to look at data? How did I do it? And what results did it came out? So I hope what I'll be sharing can inspire you to start incorporating data within your work. So first, why did I build my own data? Before working on the project, I interviewed several NGOs in Vietnam working in conservation and strengthening legal frameworks. They all confirmed that Vietnam participates in 3 roles of the pangolin trade. So the country is the demand, transit, and then supply country. We then have the name of demand and supply countries, but where and exactly how the pangolins are smuggled, we really don't know for sure. So we wanted to find patterns, and that's when I thought that we need data. So how did I do it? Because in Vietnam, there's not an open system like in China. The official court system in Vietnam is still under construction. Sometimes it's broken down. But luckily, the media reports in Vietnam, we do have a lot of detailed media report, and especially the custom, they have a news website that update almost every single seizure of pangolins. So I thought that's a really good place to start. And then I compile about 100 cases, starting from, I think, 2010 until last year. And then I started to work on interactive map that I hope that maybe in the end the result could tell us how the pangolins are smuggled in Vietnam. So I'll go through like 4 steps that I did so that you have bigger pictures of what was the real technique, and maybe you can apply that to your work. It's really not that complicated. So Patrick, can you next the slide for me? Thank you. So the first step was to gather and comb the data into an Excel file. What's important when you work with interactive maps is that you need, for me, it's my way of work only. I don't know how other journalists do it, but me, I do have map coordinates of the place that the incident happened so that the map platform, the mapping platform, we can read it better. And then when you have that file, you save that into the CSV format. It's a very popular format for mapping platform to read. And then next slide, please. And then when you have the data, you import the data into a GIS system. It's a stand for Geographic Information System. There are many out there, but personally I use ArcGIS. This is a platform that GIJN, the Global Investigative Journalism Network, they introduced in one of their conferences. So you import the file into this platform. And next step, next slide, please.
Oops. So yeah. Second. This one.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Sorry.
When you import the data, make sure that the visualization looks accurate. You don't want to, like, one pangolin that looks the same as 100 pangolin sees. So you have to tweak the ratio a bit. And so after editing the map, we will have the final product, which is this slide. So I did a bit with color, and I add a bit of background map. And so we have the final map. And last step is that you put this information to the web. So it can be done by pasting an embedding link from ArcGIS, but you will need a subscription for this service. In our case, in the Pangolin Reports, because we have a lot of data coming from a lot of countries, so we had a programmer who did the final visualization for us based on my data and my map, which looks like this. So from this map, it gives us quite some results. And it surprised me, to be honest, because when we started this project, I expected pangolin smuggling will be spread out all over the country, because Vietnam has such a long border with the demand country, which is China. We have over 1,000 kilometers of border with China. And we also have a really long border with like the potentially supply countries like Laos and Cambodia. But it was very surprising to me that the domestic cases, out of 100 cases that I could find in the last 10 years, just clearly form a pattern of routes that goes strictly from this one border pass between Laos and Vietnam. It's called Cầu Treo border pass. And then in the media reports, a lot of times they say the pangolin is being transported to the north, or specifically to a province between the border province of Vietnam and China, which is Mong Cái, that you see is the end destination, the final destination. There were also a few other scattered incidents on other remote areas, but it was in very small quantity, basically just farmers catching pangolins and wanted to sell a bit for money, but it was not enough to form patterns as strong as this one. This is mostly for domestic route, and it's mostly live pangolins. So we can see from this map here that live pangolins are being transported from Laos to via Vietnam and then to China. In terms of frozen pangolins or scales, it was very clear to us that it comes mostly by air and by sea from Africa via other transit countries such as Hong Kong or Singapore. And so you must be wondering, like, what does this result help us with the reporting? It clearly helps us visualize a much clearer pictures. So we know how smugglers get the pangolins from, how do they sell it, how do they transport it, and then it helps us to choose our focus for the undercover investigation, which is the Mong Cái city. It borders with Dongxing, China, and then the river borders along these two towns. So I think I have a bit of advice for all the journalists who has some interest in data reporting, is that a lot of time data can be the story itself, and looking at the data, you will have the big picture, and you will be able to choose where to do the field work or undercover, and especially with international crimes and smuggling network. Data visualization is immensely useful, so that you can easily understand the smuggling trade. So that is my experience. I hope it's useful. And if you have any question, I'll be happy to answer.
Thank you, Trang. That was excellent and really inspiring. Let's move on to yes, it works. Let's move on to legal use. So someone asked in a Q&A already, what's the difference between legal use and illegal use in China? And in China, there are legal stockpiles of pangolin scales that can be used legally in traditional Chinese medicine. And because these things are legal and they're regulated and require a license, there is data on where there are lists of hospitals, and there is some data on where these things are. You can, of course, look at the global trade. Someone asked it in the Q&A, the CITES trade database, and also share the link in the Q&A just now. Health Analytics Asia did a fabulous visualization of the CITES trade database, global trade. So if you're looking into this, it's a great way to start by just looking at the visualization and playing around and looking at the various species, and you can get started there. We did some more digging in China, and I'll ask maybe Jiaming to come in quickly also to talk about the licensed pharma companies that we have found. Jiaming, do you want to describe what we see here?
Yeah, this is
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Patrick. This is a data site that related with all legal pangolin scale used in traditional Chinese medical. And this data should be open to public, but they become not open to search since 2016. We obtained it from a trusted and very famous NGO in China. They had this archive in 2016. In the list, we can see there are 209 companies and produced 78 kinds of medicine that with pangolin scales inside it. This data set need to be updated, but it's not very easy to do. So the data used here is that we know where to go. We search for the province like Guangdong in this shared Excel. There's 3 companies, and we visit them. We visit 2 in Guangdong, and we know another company that is not on the list that turned out very important to our global story. That this company produced pangolin scales material to cook Chinese medical soap, and it's only need to provincial level permissions. And as you may now see in this Excel that I'll explain that before 2015, every year China has the open data on how much we use. That is 25 tons. But after that, it is not open. The data is not open. But this small company in Guangdong, they use 900 kilogram in one-time supply, and they're asking many more. So the numbers, so they are just very one small one in all these 209 companies. In the list, there's a lot of very famous and public list Chinese medical companies. The data was very suspicious that 25 tons and it's not open. So this is give us a big context and very important fund that a small company use that big. So this is about this data set. It's all about related with TCM use. And also this one, we are doing, in this map, we are doing a heat map of company legally produce medicine with pangolin scales. That 209 company mentioned above. The use of consumption medical was, you can see, is nationwide in China in this map. Well, northeast part of China, especially Jilin province, they gave out most permission to the medical companies. So this is one point that is important here, that many NGOs and working group are trying to push. The pangolin now is still in class 2 protect animals. That means that the provincial level can give permissions to companies. So we're asking for to lift it up to class 1. That means that the state council or national level, they give permission. That would be more strict and maybe lead to less corruption or this kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. So on the next, this is the medical company, and we have another one is hospital. So also the hospital is legally use pangolins across the countries, but it's 712 hospitals. It's from the above mentioned data set. Most of them are TCM, traditional Chinese medical hospital. Some of them are very, very good and very famous. In China, we have a TCM system, medical system, where we have another modern medical system. In TCM hospitals, doctors use TCM plus modern medical together to treat patients. It's like a system. So it's like you can see that in the middle of China, Henan, Shanxi, and Sichuan, they gave them more permission to hospitals to use. But I'll have to say that in real life, as we heard, many Chinese doctors, they're not very commonly used because pangolin skills is very expensive and with replacement. And actually, to hurt animal to get material was also not the TCM practice in theory. So this data is open to public, and it's a joint public data from the National Forest Bureau and the National TCM Control Bureau that gave the list. In China, we have a lot of lists that only company in the list can do the business, like a mask or the medical facility now that only in the list you can export to other countries. So that's about this page. Yeah.
Thank you, Jiaming. And we've put all of this data on a website, and you can find it here. Investigative Earth, pangolin data. We've tried to put everything on it. If there's something missing or you feel like there should be something else, let us know. I think our hosts will also share these links, and we're almost done. I would just invite you again to get the data, do the stories yourself, and get in touch if you have any questions. Here's the email. And one more request: we're doing a survey of environmental journalists to understand what the needs are, what the greatest interests are, what the discussions are. There's the link is here, the last link, the bit.ly link. We'll share that one too. And if you have time, just 5 minutes, please do fill out this survey. And thank you so much for listening. And yeah, thanks. The Earth Journalism Network just shared the survey. The recording and a summary will soon be at earthjournalism.net. And now to your questions.
Yes, thank you very much, Trang, Jiaming, and Patrick, for the very inspiring sharing of how you've been using different kinds of data. I think, you know, at this current moment when a lot of journalists are not able to do field reporting, you know, looking at existing data sources might be a good you know, source for your stories. So I think we you know, are learning a lot from what our speakers have been sharing today. So going to questions, some are already answered. So if you know, you're encouraged to see some of the answers as well on the tab. So I'll go through some questions here. Maybe a more general question from Ratna from India. She would like to know what diseases and problems those medicines, Jiaming, that you have shared address. What kind of illnesses do they address?
It's mainly about to bring more milk to new mother, and also treat cancers, as I heard.
Yeah, I think one very known. So I think it's a bit of a myth, right? It is a myth, actually, that it facilitates lactation, and a lot of NGOs have been working on it to you know, do kind of campaigns to educate the public that you know, there is no scientific proof of pangolin to promote lactation.
Yeah.
Another question on, since we are with you, Jiaming, there's a question from Jack Lam. Is there a clear reason why the Chinese government has stopped sharing data since 2016? I think this refers to the data from the pharmaceutical, like TCM companies that are using pangolin products.
I don't know actually, but I think that maybe that interest people like in the forest bureau or in the medical industry that they don't like this data to send out. That gave them the big pressure because it's very huge, 25 tons. Maybe even bigger. So I don't know actually.
Yeah, there's another question, I think, for all three of you, whoever is keen to answer. There's a question about whether you see any difference in the kind of modus operandi in smuggling live pangolins versus smuggling of pangolin scales. Do you see any difference in the operations?
I think this is a great question. This is a great question. I would say I would distinguish between mule trafficking and bulk trafficking, and the bulk trafficking happens usually in containers and shipping containers, and that is scales and or frozen animals, and then you have the live pangolins wouldn't be shipped like that, right? I think the live animals will be more regionally and less farther, like they would travel less farther than scales, if that makes any sense.
Can I chip in?
Yeah.
Yeah, in Vietnam, it's a huge difference between live pangolins and scales. First is the species. So live pangolins smuggled inside the country is mostly the Malaysian type, which suggests that it comes either mostly from Southeast Asia, while the pangolin scales and the frozen meat usually comes by sea and by air. It's mostly in containers, and they are mostly for African species. Domestically, it's transportation. It's not containers. It's not any big operation, but people carrying around their bag, people hiding about like 10 pangolins inside their car, trucks, all kinds of private and public transport. So I hope that helps.
There's a question from Bernie from the Philippines, and Bernie's asking, when you are trying to collect data on market price, as Patrick has mentioned, how do you make sure you get honest responses from those people who are buying and selling pangolin, especially since in some places it's illegal and people know that it's illegal?
It's a very good question, and of course we sometimes got some crazy prices. The best way is to just ask as many people as possible, and then you see which ones don't fit the pattern. Like you see patterns emerge quickly locally, and then you can see if there are exorbitant prices asked by one person, by another person. You'll notice after a while, just you have to keep asking and keep asking, and you get a sense of the prices.
Thank you. And then a couple of questions for Jiaming on TCM, that's traditional Chinese medicine. Do you think TCM will experience a boom since now there have been reports on how it's been used to treat coronavirus patients?
I mean, is TCM effective on COVID-19?
No, I think do you think because that it's been used to treat COVID-19 patients that it will get a boost, that more people will be buying TCM?
TCM, it was like a treasure or a history gift for many Chinese people. So I think there's still a lot of people that trust TCM, especially in the old generations. But I think educated big cities, young people, a lot of them, they're getting more used to the Western or modern medicine.
Yeah, I think there's also this very specific question from Natalie. I think from your presentation just now, Jiaming, you mentioned 25 tons, I think. Is that the total pangolin scale that's used in TCM per year? Is that for the year of 2015, or is that the median?
Yeah, that is the data that nationwide used legally. On the record is 25 tons. But
for
we
1
believe
year?
For 1 year. But we believe the number would be much higher.
Okay, thank you. Rosanna Ng from Hong Kong also has a question for you, Jiaming. She says she understands there's a permit. Hold on. Oh, that question has been answered.
Sorry.
Just disappeared from my screen.
Sorry,
okay.
That was my bad. So that was
okay.
the answer on the stockpiles. I understand there's a permit system for pangolin legal stockpiles sold in China between pharmaceutical companies. Where's the price for the pangolin scale sold for the legal stockpile, and who decides on the price? I just shared a link with Rosanna that has a look at the pricing, so she could find the prices there. I think the information we got on the prices are from the pharmaceutical companies, the traders.
Thank you, Patrick. I think there was another kind of related story on legal stockpile in China. I think that's a question whether there is data on cities, tracking whether they have data on registered legal stockpiles in China. Do you have the answer for that as well?
CITES, right?
CITES, that's right.
Yeah, CITES don't have the stockpile in China. They only have the registered, very limited international trade numbers.
Right. If I may chime in, I think that's $1 million question that a lot of pangolin conservation advocacy groups are looking for, is to find out, because in China it's illegal to import pangolin and its parts. So, there must be a finite amount of stockpiles that China has, and what is this amount of legal stockpile that they have in China that's still being used to produce TCM. So I think that's a big question, and I think so far it's been really difficult to find data on that. A question from Gono Sumyadi on what is the highest proportion of pangolin as an ingredient in TCM? So I think, yes, do you know how much pangolin do they use?
I don't know. I think it's really hard to say. Does anyone know? I don't know.
Okay, let's move on. There are reports of pangolin farms in Thailand and Laos, among other Southeast Asian countries. Have you found any connections to the trafficking from those? This is a question from Jack Lam.
If our reporting didn't go on, we reported in Thailand, but we didn't do reporting on local poaching. What we did report on was the smuggling of pangolins that were poached in Malaysia and in Indonesia, perhaps in Indonesia, but probably just Malaysia, and how they were smuggled across Thailand. And in Laos, we haven't done reporting. So, but based on Trang's data analysis and her reporting, it's a strong suggestion that it is a central, it is a key trafficking route, if that makes any sense. And to farming, it is really, really hard to to breed pangolins. So really where they come from is poachers. Hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I think, increasingly what we found as well is, as the numbers of wild pangolins in Southeast Asia is dying out. More and more pangolins are being smuggled from Africa, from Nigeria, especially to Southeast Asia, than to China, as well as China. There's a question from Aditi Patil. As journalists, what were the challenges you faced while questioning and gathering data, especially about TCM, especially on TCM in China?
If I may answer the question so that no one gets into trouble, I think just the fact that I will answer the question kind of answers the question. It's of course a very difficult environment it can be a challenging environment to report in, and there's a lack, as we tried to show with the data. I mean, you can tell from what Amy was just saying on the stockpiles that there's so much public interest in having more information that is not made available. So that's why we need to find alternative data to report on this story. So I think that really shows the difficulty of reporting the story. The other problem is, of course, this is a story of crime. So it's not the story, it's mostly a story of crime. So we're talking about poaching, trafficking, and illegal smuggling. And of course, those stories are always hard to report on because you can't just ask people very easily. You have to go undercover. And the risks of going undercover and the risks of reporting about organized crime are substantial in China as they are in surrounding countries.
Thank you. There's another question somewhat related from Gaji Sharma from WCS. He's asking whether you come across like specialist professions, like people in the shipping industry involved in pangolin trafficking, and how often do you come across these professions being involved in illegal trade of wildlife and pangolins especially?
If I may, I think one of the things we really learned and we saw across the board from Cameroon to China and in many transit countries is that we haven't found like people who specialize. We haven't found many people who in the trafficking part, in the supply chain, and not many people who specialize in pangolins. And that really speaks to a bigger problem because if they can bring 6 tons of pangolin scales from Nigeria to Singapore to KL to Hong Kong to China, they can bring pretty much anything. This is really a question of crime on a wider scale that really needs to be looked at. Our colleagues at Tempo magazine in Indonesia did a fantastic story on smugglers in Indonesia, and they found ties links to syndicates of who operate who deal with smuggle other things as well. And maybe I'll share the link afterwards. It's a fascinating read. And it really goes to show that pangolins are just one part of a portfolio of these people.
Yeah, so relating to this, Michael Kuhn is asking whether you see smugglers specializing in pangolin, or do you see that the same people are also smuggling other wildlife and TCM ingredients like tiger bones and elephant tusks?
Yes.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I think EJN at the moment is also discussing a report with Trang here to look into the smuggling of other wildlife. So it'll be interesting to see some of the routes in Vietnam, especially, whether they are similar. There's a question on money laundering. So L is asking, yeah, do you see any sort of, yeah, in terms of pangolin smuggling? I think the question is about whether do you see what the effect of money laundering regulation, whether that has an effect on pangolin smuggling in Vietnam, Thailand, China, and in other countries?
I think that's a great question, because the payments, especially for these bigger shipments, that there are payments for these bigger shipments that are made, and where do they come from and how are they made? That's a really great question, and I haven't seen any evidence, and I think we haven't seen any evidence that the money laundering route has led to prosecutions. What we've more seen is that there were these record seizures at ports, but yeah, if that answers the question. So I at least haven't seen any evidence.
Okay. There's a question from Guno Samyadi on, is it correct that there's a preference for Malay pangolin, for live pangolin, and for scales African pangolin, or is it just because of the distance it takes to smuggle pangolin? It's easier for African pangolins to smuggle scales instead of live animals.
Jiaming, do you want to, or should I?
I think on TCM, on the TCM dictionary, that only Chinese pangolin should be in that dictionary. All the Malay or Africa pangolin should not be used in TCM. But in practice, they're all used in China. And about alive ones, of course, a live one, if you want to eat pangolin, a live one will be the best. But this animal is very, very hard to transfer with long distance. They are very sensitive. They are mammals like humans. They have a lot of emotions. So it's very hard to transfer very long about live pangolin.
Yeah, it sounds like it's more a logistical concern here, that African pangolins are mostly smuggled for their parts.
Yeah.
Okay, and there's a question from Natalie Bertrams. Do you have information on the numbers of African pangolins smuggled? There is one of our EJM partners called the Oxpackers. They're investigative wildlife investigative reporting network based in South Africa. I think Fiona from Oxpackers is actually participating in this webinar, so perhaps Fiona might be able to help answer this question through our chat on Zoom, because Oxpackers has done a couple of stories looking at smuggling of African pangolins to Asia for EJN. So Patrick or anyone, do you have the answers here, or otherwise I think it would be great for Oxpackers to answer.
Yeah, sure. I mean, Oxpackers is a fantastic tool, and I just wanted to showcase three more data sources that can also give you information in addition to Oxpackers wildlife. I think these four are kind of the go-to sources.
Right. Yeah, there was a question just now which I thought I would, it has been answered, but I thought I would open up as well so everyone can hear the answers, and other speakers can also chime in. It's this question on the implication of COVID-19 on pangolin. Now that pangolin has been, there's a spotlight on pangolin trade because of COVID-19 and sort of pangolin being suspected as an intermediate host of this new virus. Would that sort of, bring down the trafficking of pangolins? Any thoughts on that, Patrick, Trang, or Jiaming?
I would say that there are of course no more mules. That the people who smuggled the scales and their luggage, and then flew from DRC, from Nigeria to China, to Hong Kong. They're not flying anymore, of course. And as far as the big ship, the borders are closed, so there's less of that. But as far as the big shipments are concerned, we don't know. There was a big seizure in Malaysia earlier this month, several tons. So that seems to be going on, and perhaps it's also not a priority right now of law enforcement.
I would say something on the education of wildlife, the dangers of eating or of eating wildlife in China in this pandemic. I think the license or the education to public was very huge, but we are still worried because by now pangolin scales are still legal used, and we don't see that they are lifting it up to class 1 or any change, but we are only hoping so.
And Trang, do you want to talk about sort of COVID and sort of that driving new anti-wildlife trafficking laws in Vietnam that we are hearing about?
Oh, you mean COVID-19 makes people well, can you repeat the question?
So with COVID-19 pandemic, there have been some responses from government, including in China, which has put on a ban on wildlife consumption. In Vietnam, I remember seeing reports on a plan to come up with some new anti-wildlife trafficking regulation. I don't know whether you've seen that as well.
Yeah, well, I think definitely that it would spark debates about whether to strengthen the law of anti-wildlife trafficking. Just that the last month we had a survey on about 1,000 people, Vietnamese people, on how much do they believe that COVID-19 is from wildlife, and would they be supporting the government to ban the wildlife trade and all the black markets forever. So we had about like over 90% of the survey attendants saying that they would 100% support the government to ban the wildlife trade. So I think in Vietnam, all the communications agency, they are and the NGOs, they are trying to drive this to have an end result of an infinite ban.
Thank you, Trang. Yeah, I think at this point, there's a lot of interest in wildlife trafficking, and a lot of eyes on it. And I think for journalists, it's a good time to do stories on wildlife, and also looking at sort of educating general public about the issues relating to wildlife trafficking, and more generally looking at human pressure on the environment. Okay, I think there's one more question that just come in from Nat Summon, actually responding to Elle's question. Nat says, I think Thailand and the environmental NGOs try to work with anti-money laundering organizations to penalize criminals during the Rosebud and other wildlife smuggling a few years back, because the penalties, according to the Environmental Act, were almost nothing for the criminals. Not sure if it's true now. Okay, if there are no further questions, I think we will wrap up today's webinar. We've got really good questions, and I thank you very much for all your wonderful questions. I think there's a lot of questions that's worth exploring. Some of the questions can be developed into stories as well. So I thank you very much, and I hope this webinar has been useful to you. We have another webinar coming out tomorrow in the Philippines. and on wildlife trade, and it's linked to zoonotic diseases targeting Philippines journalists. We have another webinar next week on the 6th of May, looking at how we can leverage different data sets to investigate wildlife as well as other environmental issues such as air pollution, food production, and how COVID-19 combined with some of these environmental threats are creating, impacting on the most vulnerable communities in the world. Thank you again to Patrick, Trang, and Jiaming. Once again, the recording and a summary of today's webinar will be published on earthjournalism.net. I hope you'll keep a lookout for it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.